So again, I welcome everyone, Teresa Spangler. We are here to talk about 8 simple ESG strategies for greater value creation. And we're going to do that with Merritt Cook and Chris Downing from Global Imprint. So I'm pleased to have them as part of our Global Trends webinar series today. In order to kind of get started, I wanted to share this quote from Wired magazine. But reaching net zero emissions is going to require innovative solutions at a grand scale. And innovation and the work that we do with innovation, we constantly see the alignment with ESG and executive ranks when we're working. There's no new product that anyone's working on today that isn't thinking about the sustainability of that product or the development of the product and its impact on any part of ESG. And there's a lot of different factors that Chris and Merritt will talk to. But I thought this was an interesting example. I worked with a major soft drink company way back in the days that they started this in 2009 and 10. And Pepsi has achieved some great awards around their work in PepsiCo in India with the efforts of saving more than 17 billion liters of water through community water programs and positively impacting thousands of community members. And first of all, I just want to bring up, if you look at that, the innovation is happening with multiple people, multiple constituents. It's not just inside of PepsiCo. They were really reached out and to work with the community. They're the largest purchasers of potatoes, and it uses this power for good in sourcing sustainability of 24,000 small Indian farmers. It also has a program aimed at replenishing water in stressed areas, and through which it will restore nearly 5 billion liters of water. And so that's an incredible impact to the Indian community, but all over. And those actual innovation, the innovative ways that they're doing this has impacted the community, other people around them, small farmers, and just a multitude of ways that we'll talk a little bit more about today. So with that, let me introduce Merritt Spangler while Chris is getting up their presentation to share with us today, and Chris Downing, who we have with us from Global Imprint. So Merritt is a sustainability consultant. She's also an investigations expert and entrepreneur. She is a director of ESG practice group and is a certified human trafficking investigator, an ACAMS human trafficking and smuggling certification. She holds a UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism and Open Source Investigation certification. And she's very involved and a consulting expert at environmental sustainability and governance, working with public and private organizations, designing their ESG strategies and their roadmaps. And Chris Downing's sustainability is also in sustainability and innovation consultant. And she's a former vice president of commercialization and innovation for the world-known Center for Creative Leadership, one of the largest leadership development institutions. And as vice president of commercialization and innovation, I think she's probably seen a lot of this also firsthand. In addition, she is an adjunct communications professor and experienced at teaching business policy and strategy in communications. So I welcome these two and very excited to have them join us today for this session. And with that, I'm going to kick it off and with the agenda, and then kick it back to them and let them start sharing their experiences. We're going to talk about the global commitment to sustainability and why is ESG so important today, any day, and what steps to take in your ESG journey, and how to implement an ESG strategy. So with that, let me pass it over to Merritt and Chris and welcome them. And thank you very much for joining us today from Global Imprint.
Thank you. So we thought it would be helpful to see a timeline of events that kind of explains why sustainability is somewhat of a buzzword today. So sustainability and ESG has been a part of organizations for a long time, but much of today's conversation really stems back to the Paris Climate Agreement. And per that agreement, countries were expected to communicate their plans for reducing greenhouse gas emissions 5 years after signing that treaty. And that treaty works in 5-year increments. And so in 2020, governments came out with a plan, and per the treaty, they agreed to set a target to limit the increase in global temperatures to 2 degrees Celsius, but particularly they would prefer 1.5 degrees Celsius. And I think we've already reached 1.1, and we're expected to surpass and not meet the Paris Climate Agreement. But for that temperature to happen, global emissions must drop 45% relative to where they were in 2010. Currently, we're on track for emissions to rise 16% by 2030. So there's a lot of urgency here. But after the agreement was signed, the United Nations created Sustainable Development Goals, which encompass tackling peace and prosperity for people and the planet, and another sort of launch into this ESG conversation. Much of this affected the regulatory landscape, primarily in the EU, and the SEC in the US has been talking as of late to put regulations around global emissions for companies. But the countries are putting a lot of pressure, or the government is putting a lot of pressure on businesses to assist in meeting these goals. But studies have actually shown that sustainability is really good for business. And Chris, I'll let you turn it to the next page.
Great. Thank you, Myriad. Well, before we dive in even deeper, we wanted to just do a quick reminder of ESG, what it stands for. What we know is that there's an alphabet soup of acronyms and terms, and sometimes it can be pretty overwhelming. So we wanted to just set the stage and do a quick refresher on just what is ESG. So it does stand for environment, social, and governance. And it really is just, how it relates to corporate sustainability. So environment is the extent to which, a company can steward natural resources across its operations and supply chain. Social really reflects and focuses on the company's management and impact on its workforce, as well as the communities that it operates in and serves and is a part of. And then finally, governance is about the decision-making structures and policies and processes that are in place that develop equality, transparency, anti-corruption, and sustainability. So these are 3 very important elements that, when implemented well or executed well, are intertwined and they're connected, all connected to the organization's sustainability. So from that point, we want to launch into a little bit more about why. So Myriad, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, so McKinsey found that there was a 50% cost reduction if companies focus on strong ESG credentials like operational efficiency and waste reduction. 80% of reviewed companies by an Oxford study demonstrated that prudent sustainability practices have a positive influence on investment performance. And 72% of investors have expressed interest in sustainable investing, according to BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager. Their CEO, Larry Fink, has said that no issue ranks higher than climate change on our clients' list of priorities. So it is a priority for the business community as well for governments.
And I think we're past the point where, this is just a feel good or a do good, or let's just do it for a social cause reason, that there are truly, very strong business reasons to implement an ESG plan. And, so there are a couple examples. One that reported recently that the Chicago Bears, with Soldier Field, they actually removed all their paper towels and went to air dryers, and it reduced their carbon emissions 76%. It saved them $12,000 in paper towel costs. And, that's just like a small step, but it was truly a cost reduction and an improvement to their business performance. There's another small apparel manufacturing company in Burlington, North Carolina, it's called TS Apparel. And, really transparency in their supply chain is what they focused on. And in particular, they call it dirt to shirt in the industry. And it's kind of like when cotton is grown from the dirt, how many miles does it take to get a shirt produced? And their goal is less than 500 miles as opposed to 4,000 miles. And so it really is about, their supply chain and making sure that they can reduce the number of miles between where the raw materials are grown and produced and where the shirt is actually manufactured. And so, how does that focus on cost reductions? Well, one thing that Eric Henry, the CEO, said, he had a quote, it was fascinating. He goes, I don't have to worry. And they made masks, or making masks in addition to t-shirts. And he said, I don't have to worry about having 100,000 masks sitting on a ship in the LA harbor trying to get in. I think a lot of people are starting to realize the advantage of a local, nimble, transparent supply chain. And that's really allowing TS Designs, again, a small apparel manufacturing company, to fulfill their orders quickly, keep up with their customer demand. So really, really strong examples that go beyond just a do-good reason why we would want to implement ESG. So, the other why is kind of like the gaining buy-in from stakeholders. And so we see a couple of different elements here. One, in aligning and engaging stakeholders, it is imperative that C-level executives align their business strategy and innovation strategy, quite honestly, with their sustainability to commit to true change. It's important to actually outline and communicate this vision to all the stakeholders. This could be investors or customers, certainly employees, is really critical. And this can culminate in a purpose map, which is really just a statement and a communication tool that helps to outline this purpose and vision. And it can help everyone communicate and understand the why of what we're doing. So Myriad, what about the what? What is it? What can we do?
Yeah. So we have 8 steps here, and I'll start with the first 4, but we believe it starts with leveraging the tools. And there's a dizzying array of standards, frameworks, rating agencies, organizations to kind of sift through that will tell you how your ESG strategy is performing. And a lot of those organizations are looking to monetize on your ESG path. So it can be quite a challenge to figure out which ones to pay attention to. And let me clarify between standards and ratings agencies. So standards include organizations like SASB, so that's SASB, or TCFD, which was defined and created by Bloomberg. And they offer metrics, both quantitative and qualitative, to measure based on the industry that your company is in. So these metrics are viewed by the organization to be material to your company within that particular industry. Rating agencies are simply combing through online data, which includes any publicly available information. It could be impact reports, 10Ks, et cetera, and benchmarking you against your competitors. And ratings agencies in particular have been a bit controversial as of late, just because of the quality of the data that they're combing through and the variability of that data amongst each agency. So we take them with a grain of salt. But we have a particular client with an $8 billion market cap, and we helped them kind of figure out which ones to pay attention to by defining what's most important to their investors. And we found that SASB and TCFD were the most applicable frameworks for them. And oftentimes public companies will find that MSCI, ISS, and Sustainalytics would be the most relevant from a rating perspective. However, take these frameworks and ratings agencies with a grain of salt, like I've said, and focus more on the organization's strategy and let your ESG strategy speak for itself, first and foremost. Secondly, peer landscape. So looking at what peer companies are doing with ESG will help guide your organization's own strategy, but can also be viewed as a huge competitive advantage. One example is 3M, which has long understood that being proactive about environmental risk can be a source of competitive advantage. The company had saved $2.2 billion since introducing its Pollution Prevention Pays, which is 3Ps program. That was back in 1975, preventing pollution upfront by reformulating products, improving manufacturing processes, redesigning equipment, and recycling and reusing waste and from production. Third is material issues. So material issues really come down to risk and determining risk factors associated with various aspects of ESG. Investors often want to see environmental risk primarily, but social and governance are also extremely important. So that could include things like diversity of your board, and from a governance perspective, your whistleblower process or your anti-money laundering policy. But for example, on the environmental front, GM had to temporarily close their truck plant in Louisiana because the plant relied on a component made in Japan, and a tsunami had closed that Japanese plant. So determining what risks from an environmental perspective is really important to investors. And lastly, defining baseline metrics. We believe it's best practice to collaborate with internal and external stakeholders on determining what is material to your business, and beginning from there to outline a baseline metrics, both qualitative and quantitative to start from. And when I say qualitative versus quantitative, so qualitative could be your cybersecurity strategy, quantitative would probably fall under a lot of environmental statistics like your greenhouse gas emissions. And Chris, I'll let you turn it to the next slide.
Yeah, so, with the tools and the peer or competitive analysis, really thinking about the material issues and defining metrics, we move to number 5, which is really in essence a gap analysis. Kind of like what do we have? What are we currently doing? Where do we need to go? What are those baseline metrics that we really want to track and target? And what are our gaps? So we need to do that level of analysis too, to just determine what kind of performance are we expecting and where do we want to focus most. And for step 6, we want to work backwards. So once we have the metrics and the language and the vision kind of documented, from there we need to come up with that proper path. What do we need to do to reach our goals? And so in step 7, you actually develop the implementation plan. The key here, not only is it to have a cross-functional team. So this is not a best practice is not to have this sitting in one department or one group, or having one person kind of taking the mantle for this. It truly is cross-functional, and more importantly, it needs to have committed and effective leadership at all levels in the organization, from the top throughout all of the organization, to be effective and to actually develop a plan that can ripple across the entire organization. And, an example here, I think about just the leadership's role in making sure that a plan is implemented. Unilever comes to mind. They provide a lot of examples for us in this space, and especially in how their leadership and cross-functional efforts to really connect their business strategy to innovation at the employee level. There was an example that in one of their tea bag manufacturing plants in England, workers there were innovating around the way that tea bags were produced. And they ended up saving 9 tons of paper just by making some changes in their manufacturing process of tea bags. And another example with Unilever is that 6 employees from the shop floor in a factory in India came to their supervisor and said, we would like to start a beauty and hair care course for women in our village. We think it would be great for them to become entrepreneurs and start their own businesses. And in fact, we can sell more of the Unilever products. And to date, they've run 825 women through the program who have since set up businesses and are using the Unilever products in their businesses. And so I bring that up as an example of implementation, because it really is something that can be, not every implementation plan is a broad scale, huge corporate effort, but it really is about setting an innovation culture or a culture of sustainability that comes through all of the different groups. And so while we might not have heard big, news about those two examples of a tea bag plant in England or a factory in India that really started to innovate around sustainable practices, it's that culture of innovation around sustainability, it has been driven throughout that entire organization. So the implementation plans are really important when they are tied to the vision and direction of the company and then put forward through cross-functional efforts throughout the organization. And then finally, step 8, what? We need to report on this, report on our metrics. It's not just about talking about it, but actually coming up with and developing a transparent report. Or an impact report so that the organization can really fully state and understand and communicate the value of what they've been doing and report on their progress. I don't know, Merritt or Teresa, if you have anything else to add to that.
I would just add that, making these changes and the work that we've done on the innovation side, anything when you're making a change has a cost to it. Initially. And so the return on that cost is what you start to monitor. And so it takes dedicated resources and time up front, but the payback is significant as you let it flow through the cycles and just remove the barriers. So if everyone is aligned, as you say, it works more smoothly and that cost starts to return itself very quickly.
Yeah, it's a great point. So we talked a little bit about the why. Why is this important? What is it? What can we do? What are some steps we can take? And now we kind of move into the how. So how do we actually do this? So Merritt, I'm going to turn it over to you for kicking this off.
Yeah. So we definitely believe that what gets measured gets done. So and you're able to sort of set goals from those baseline metrics, and that's what ESG is all about. And what investors want to see is that you have a starting point, but what are your goals 5 years from now, 10 years from now? And not just around emissions. I think a lot of companies are coming out and greenhouse gas emissions and your footprint there is very important, but other aspects of ESG are equally as important to investors as well. And just taking those small steps to get to those bigger goals. And we believe it's also best practice to bring internal stakeholders together up front. So if the CEO, the CFO, and especially the board take ESG seriously, it'll have a ripple effect throughout the organization. And investors are very keen on seeing that the board is taking ESG seriously. And then, of course, tracking progress and once you have a sustainability report put out there, it should come out every year, and being able to track that progress is going to be very important.
Yeah, I know my colleagues hear me say this all the time, but I love that Chinese proverb. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the next best time to plant a tree is today. It's now. And I think that's kind of how I see a lot of the ESG efforts is that, sometimes we can just engage in a lot of hand wringing and it's just, it's so big, it's so much, how can we possibly do this? And it's really about just taking one step at a time, putting even if it's a baby step, one step at a time, but really not trying to boil the ocean, not trying to do everything, but to really pick the significant efforts that the company can do to really make a difference in all of the areas of ESG. So I don't know if that's, it serves as kind of a motivation, but just a way to kind of tackle this and know that it can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be. So we also have accumulated some best practices and certainly some ideas on where companies may fall short on their ESG efforts. And this first one is when they separate purpose from strategy. So, we can just with all of the rush to be ESG compliant, it's caused organizations to lose sight of the bigger picture, which is really about purpose. So if ESG is just seen as an add-on or a separate initiative, or if it's something that we just want to communicate or market to our constituents, but we're not really doing things, which is also called greenwashing, it fails when it's just seen as an add-on or a separate program. So it really is important that that ESG is connected. Its purpose is connected with the strategy and the purpose of the organization. A second area where companies tend to kind of fall short is when they actually cherry pick their stakeholder priorities. So while investors are a key stakeholder group, there are other audiences that are important too. So I think about new employees and attracting the workers of now and in the future, where they have increasingly very strong feelings and thoughts and demands about what they expect from the company that they work for. And really it connects to the first one around purpose, but it also is a really important stakeholder group. So, employees are a stakeholder group. Customers certainly are a stakeholder group, investors as well. So when businesses can actually look at their ESG strategy and look at all of their stakeholders together, it doesn't alienate certain groups. And it also keeps you from developing a very disconnected one-off ESG plan. So the third area is companies make the mistake of really just kind of making it a high level, management level initiative. So just with the example of Unilever, really driving it down to employees in all of their different locations, ESG really has the potential to influence employee retention, reputation and brand of the organization, and certainly valuation of the company. So it's important for the activities of ESG not to just be capped at a management level, but to truly be driven throughout the organization, including board level oversight, but definitely throughout the organization.
And can I just mention actually one last statistic from Harvard, but just based on diversity, kind of piggyback off of what Chris said, but companies that have more diverse management teams actually have 19% higher innovation revenue and report better overall financial performance. And not to just talk about investors again, but investors do oftentimes want to see diversity statistics from the board all the way down to just the, the overall company internally. So definitely important.
Yeah, great comment. So I wonder, I know looks like we have a message in the chat, and Teresa, I don't know, I can't see the chat right now, but I don't know if that's a question, but I would love to, I know we've put a lot of information in front of everybody, and I'm curious as to whether there are some reactions, pushback, thoughts, questions, other things that we want to consider.
Well,
or
let's go to the first. There is a question, and I'll invite anyone that has another question to either post it in the chat, or I'll open this up in just a moment. But Maria, you might have to go back and say which program, but Maria was listening, Chris, I think, to something you were mentioning, a program earlier on, and she wanted to know if it had a cost to that program or if it was free. Maria, if you're still on, could you share that?
I think it was the Unilever.
Oh, yeah. The Unilever.
Yes, exactly that one.
Okay, thank you, Maria. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you to you.
And so help me with the question is there a cost?
Was there a cost to the Unilever program, or was it free?
Oh, for the women in the
yeah,
that is a great question. I don't know. I can find out.
I believe it was free, Chris. I believe they offered it to the community for free, from what I had read before.
I think that's right too. I don't know definitively, but that's something we can definitely follow up on just to make sure, because I think it kind of hits to one of your points, Teresa, too, is that there's a cost to this, right? I mean, certainly time is money and money is money, and there are real costs to implementing some of these programs, and yet there's a cost benefit to analysis that needs to be done, and in many cases there is the benefit. So we need to confirm that. We can track that down, but I believe if there was a cost for the women in the villages, it was very minimal, but I believe it may have been free.
Some of these, I know some programs like that, I don't know about the Unilever, but they are free with sponsors. So they might have a sponsored bag of items that help the women, and it's little samples, and they pay for that, and it helps to fund some of those programs. So I don't know specifically about that program, but I've seen it done, especially in India that way. But it's on, I think it'd be good to know, and we could get back to Maria on that through some emails to those questions. Are there any other questions? If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask it or put it in the chat.
So while we're waiting for that, I just wanted to elaborate on that one example again and think about ESG. So from the Unilever example in India, not only was that, it was addressing all three aspects of ESG. So from the environmental perspective, you actually had products being produced and made and actually delivered through the distributor network, through these women, small business entrepreneurs, in a very tight, small kind of supply chain aspect, right? So they weren't shipped far away. It was really helping service that local community. From a social perspective, truly reaching out and trying to connect with a group of people who have been underserved and underrepresented, and giving them the opportunity to make money and have a business and feed their families. And maybe less so from the governance perspective. I'm not sure about how they actually put that forward, or the transparency with the policies and procedures, but I think it does hit on all aspects of ESG. So there are many of these initiatives can actually touch on all of them. It's not just an environmental thing, or not just a social aspect, but really trying to connect all three.
I'll share too, there are innovation and entrepreneurship things going on, and some of these are happening, and also in big companies where they're reinventing concrete, for example. It's concrete and using different materials that are as strong or stronger than concrete that absorb CO2, making asphalt or different variables and materials that act like asphalt, but they absorb water for floods. And even those are somewhat directly and indirectly related to ESG initiatives, but there is an enormous amount of innovation going on in companies that are trying to solve these big problems and provide services and products to companies to help them.
I think oftentimes too, companies will, just sort of going back on material issues, will determine risk factors and then sort of pump finances into R&D to counteract those risk factors. And that's definitely one example. And Microsoft and their facility in Iceland kind of pushing CO2 emissions back into the ground is one example of that. But yeah.
That's excellent. And if you're not reading about the airline industry and their commitment to at 2050 to reduce the CO2 and carbon emissions from airlines, it's a huge undertaking, and it's going to take every partner. It's going to take government. It's going to take policy. It's going to take the working together, competitives, cooperation. So all of that working together is the only way that something that large can happen in many cases. So are there any other questions? Amanda has a question. Where are we seeing more traction in organizations in terms of ESG initiative adoption? In the CFO portfolio, legal, compliance, procurement, purchasing? Are we seeing any trends in leadership? Which is an excellent question, Amanda. Mr. Merritt?
We were just talking about this similarly in a meeting right before the call with a particular client. So Merritt, why don't you just respond?
Yeah, I mean, from our experience, we're seeing it under the chief financial officer, just getting pushback from investors. But we've also seen it with global counsel. It's really a cross-functional initiative though. So even if the CEO brings it to us, we end up pushing to have a lot of folks around the organization involved, and making sure that the CEO is aware and that the board is aware. But with that said, we have had internal stakeholder meetings with clients, and oftentimes the global counsel will be in those meetings, because I think right now, just given the ambiguity of the regulatory landscape with SEC and putting out global emissions, or I'm sorry, greenhouse gas emissions data and specific data, there's a legal aspect to that, and I think global counsel is really important to have them as part of the conversation.
Exactly.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah,
It is such a great question, and I don't think there's like a universal kind of single answer. One other thing that I thought was really interesting is several months ago, Global Imprint facilitated a conversation with a group of CEOs, and some of their just asking them questions really about ESG and their practices and where and how it's being handled in their organizations. And I thought there were some interesting comments about where this sits. And they said, don't count out two important C-level executives. One is the Chief Human Resources Officer, so CHRO. And really the connection for them is just around recruiting, retaining, keeping employees, and the extent to which companies can really truly demonstrate and implement ESG practices really has an impact on the employees that they're able to attract and retain. And then the second C-level position is marketing. So the marketing officers, and really that speaks to just the desire to make sure that, the company is connecting to its constituents, to its customers, potential customers, in meaningful ways. And so they just said, don't kind of forget about that important aspect too. So
when it starts to relate to your brand, and if your brand's not representing sustainability and really being socially responsible, it's going to impact the consumer's desire to want to, or the company selling their brand to other people. And so I think it starts to impact who's really going to stay interested in that brand if they're not sustainable practices. We do have another question, and that one is, it's actually two-part. How do you see smaller to mid-size private companies approaching the topics of sustainability and ESG? And the second part of that is, do you see different areas geographically, specifically where the focus, or is specifically the focus in Europe versus North America? So what are you seeing in both of those, small and mid, and also regionally?
Yeah, I can kind of start with that. So as far, I don't see too much difference, or we don't see too much difference between public and private companies, other than the sort of investor and maybe regulatory landscape. But private companies also have to sort of comply with local environmental laws, and also want to retain talent and be have good governance. And so we're really seeing that they also are taking these things very seriously. I will say that if a small to medium-sized business has plans of going public, thinking about your ESG strategy now is extremely important. So we have a client that is public now, very young public company, but is being compared to peer companies that have been around for decades and have built an ESG strategy over 10, 20 years. And had they started their ESG strategy while they were private, I think they would be maybe in a better position now. So that's just one thing to sort of consider. And then your second question, Europe versus North America, I don't think there's a huge difference except from the regulatory landscape. The EU is well ahead of us on a lot of environmental laws, and actually a lot of laws around sort of social and governance aspects of ESG. One in particular would be the whistleblower regulation. So requiring any company with 500 or more employees to implement a whistleblower platform for their employees. And then there's an array of new environmental laws. So I think they're well ahead of us, but I think with the SEC's discussions around creating a regulatory landscape for greenhouse gas emissions and other aspects of social and diversity metrics, will probably catch up.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, you're right, with Europe having much more developed goals and targets in this area, it does affect US companies who have operations in Europe, and in some cases, even just serving customers in Europe. But certainly if you have a presence, manufacturing operations or distribution centers or whatever in Europe, then the company would be impacted by what's going on there in those regulations. So I think it's definitely a changing and dynamic landscape, and one that we all kind of staying on top of with all the change. And I do hope that, and I feel confident that the US is following suit with some of the regulations and policies that the EU has already embarked on.
So great. I think very good points, both of you. I also think they're some of the smaller mid-sized companies could leverage a social platform and responsibility platform for competitive advantage against bigger companies that aren't doing that. So that might be also a consideration. We had another
Absolutely.
question from Carol.
Oh,
Carol,
actually, I was going to make one other comment, Teresa, if I could,
Yeah.
about small companies too. And, sometimes again, feeling like it's just overwhelming or too much, or maybe this is for the big companies, but not for us. But there are things that you can put in place that are very low or minimal or no cost in the policy realm. And so an example I'll give is like on the governance side, people policies, like what about your job descriptions? Are they written in a way that don't limit candidates who could very well do the job, but perhaps due to the requirements or the way you've crafted the job description, you're not going to attract a diverse pool. As you look to your board and who you have on your board, is it diverse, right? So there are policies and things that you can do in the ESG space that are little to no cost that any size company, size is irrelevant. It's more about the practice and the orientation and the culture that you're trying to put forward in your organization and all the things that you can do to make a difference. So I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add that point.
Excellent point. Anytime you have an excellent point, you can interrupt.
If it's a bad point, I won't. Yeah.
I'm going to hold it back. No, the next question is from Carol, and I think Carol knows what my thoughts are on this. What are your thoughts on B Corp? And is a B Corp of value in the U.S. or is it only U.S.? Is it valuable worldwide? Do you see value in a B Corp? Do you know much about the B Corp?
I would say we definitely see value in it because we are in the process of becoming a B Corp, or we are a B Corp already, I think. But yes, we definitely see value in it. I have not been through the process, or we have not been through the process for particular clients on the ESG front, but we definitely see value. I think from a consumer company perspective, I think it would have enormous value. I think consumers are, they want to consume products and invest in companies that are doing good things. And I think the process to becoming a B Corp is so difficult and long that I think consumers understand the B Corp initiative. And I think that it's just an easy stamp of kind of approval on the ESG front.
Excellent.
Great response. Yeah.
Any other questions before we wrap up? I think Chris and Merritt have some links to share that might help you with an assessment or.
Yeah, let me go to that. Well, and we've already covered our now what with questions and discussion. This was great. The questions were phenomenal. So thank you everybody for the contributions. It was great. As far as some next steps, these are just possible next steps that we would encourage you to do. The first one I love. This is a free ESG score and report. So if you go onto the globalimprint.com website, you'll come to the homepage and a little pop-up screen will occur asking you if you would like to get an ESG score. So this is just basically a readiness type assessment that you can use, and we will give you your customized report back as to how you scored and how you answered the questions. This tool, it's a free tool. So you just go and take it. It probably takes 6 or 7 minutes to complete. So it's pretty quick. And you could use that with some of your stakeholders, right? You could imagine facilitating a conversation or getting an ESG conversation started in your company by having everybody fill it out and then, look at the results and compare how we think about how ready we are in terms of environmental or social or governance. So that's one potential next step. We would love to come in and actually just facilitate a session with your board or with your executives. I'm happy to talk through things like what we've gone over in this report or something that might be more custom to your particular business or concern. And you may want to move forward in actually implementing a full ESG program, and we can certainly help you think through what would be the next steps or what would be the right approach for you and your company and your industry. The globalimprint.com has wonderful resources. We have a Global Imprint magazine with some excellent just thought leadership and good articles on ESG and sustainability. So we would encourage you to visit the website as well. And Merritt, is there anything else or that you would add to that? Or any questions or comments?
I'm sorry.
I don't have anything else
okay.
to add, I don't think.
Okay. And I guess with that, if no more questions, I want to thank everyone for joining Plaza Bridge Group's webinar series as we continued. And for those that did come in a little late, we are going to share this video with everyone that RSVP'd. So with that, I am going to stop recording and thank everyone for joining us, and you're welcome to drop off anytime you're ready. Thank you, everyone.